All right, so uh, are you ready to dive into this DeepSeek thing? It's gotten everyone talking.
Yeah, definitely. Silicon Valley's kind of lost its mind over this Chinese AI startup.
Well, yeah, and our listeners too, because you guys sent in a ton of stuff, news articles and forum discussions even.
Oh, yeah. I've saw some pretty intense academic papers in there, too. We've got our work cut out for us today.
Yeah, but that's what this deep dive's for. You find the sources, and we help you break it all down, right? So
Exactly.
DeepSeek, they just released this AI model R1, and it's shaking things up. People are comparing it to like
Oh, yeah, it's being put up against the big ones like OpenAI, Google.
right, and the crazy thing is they're saying it might even be better. Like it can do
Oh.
more
It's,
or
it's definitely achieving comparable results.
yeah, and for way less money.
Yeah.
Plus they've gone and made the whole thing open source.
Which is huge.
It's huge, but
Like,
some people are saying it's all just smoke and mirrors. Like,
yeah, there are some pretty serious concerns. I mean, is this just a power play by the Chinese government?
right. Or is the tech even actually that good?
There are a lot of questions about those development costs, too.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning. DeepSeek is this Chinese AI company, and R1 is their
It's their latest model. They're really trying to compete with the big names.
yeah, they want to be the top dog, and they're saying R1 is like way cheaper to develop and
Yeah, they're making a big deal about the efficiency.
well, and it said it only cost them $5.5 million to make it. Now, I know some people are like, oh,
But yeah, that number's definitely been debated.
but even if it's more than that,
Mm.
it's still way less than what like OpenAI is spending. So how are they doing this?
Well, one of the big things is this reinforcement learning. It's this totally different way of training AI.
So instead of giving the model a bunch of data and telling what to do, they're like,
They basically just let it figure stuff out on its own.
so it's more trial and error. Like,
It's like imagine you're teaching a dog a trick.
again,
You don't break it down step by step. You just reward the dog when it gets close to what you want. That's kind of what they're doing with R1.
that's actually really interesting. So it's like AI boot camp. They just throw it in the deep end.
And it either sinks or swims.
Apparently, it's swimming pretty well, but that's not all they're doing right. They're also using this,
Mixture of experts.
yeah, mixture of experts. What is that?
So basically, instead of one giant AI brain doing everything, they have all these smaller networks that specialize in different things.
Well, so it's like a team of specialists.
Exactly. And only the experts needed for a specific task are activated. So it's super efficient.
Like having a whole bunch of AI specialists on call, but you only pay for the ones you use.
Pretty clever, right?
Super clever. But before we get too far ahead, let's back up. One of the sources you sent in gave this whole timeline of DeepSeek's development. This didn't just happen overnight.
No, they've been at this for a while. They started with DeepSeek V1 back in January of 2024.
So like a year ago.
Yeah, it was a 67 billion parameter model using a traditional transformer architecture. Nothing too crazy. But then, just 6 months later, they released V2, and it jumped to 236 billion parameters. They introduced that multi-headed latent attention and their version of mixture of experts.
They were already thinking about efficiency back then.
Absolutely.
But then what?
V3 in December 2024. 671 billion parameters. They started incorporating reinforcement learning and figuring out how to distribute the workload across multiple GPUs. Really powerful stuff.
Wow. And that leads to
R10, their first reasoning model, which came out January 2025.
this year.
Yeah, just last month. This one was trained exclusively with reinforcement learning.
And then R1 combines that with more traditional methods. So they're kind of pulling from everything they've learned.
Exactly. It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, but then they do this totally unexpected thing and they make R1 open source.
That's the part that really blew everyone's mind.
Stop right there. We got to explain this to our listeners. What does open source even mean when we're talking about AI? Like, why should they care?
Okay, so basically open source means they're making the entire blueprint of R1 available for anyone to use, change, even distribute.
So anyone can just mess around with their super advanced AI.
Yeah, it's a huge shift.
Yeah.
Before, these models were controlled by big tech companies.
So DeepSeek is like opening up the toy box and saying, go wild.
Pretty much. And it has the potential to completely change the AI landscape. More transparency, collaboration.
It could make AI accessible to everyone.
Yeah.
Like I even saw this post where someone was running it on their own computer at home.
It's crazy, right?
Totally. But there's got to be some downsides to this whole thing, right?
Oh, there are definitely some concerns.
Like what?
Well, for one, we don't know anything about the data they used to train R1. They made the model open source, but the data's still a secret.
So it could be biased. We just don't know.
Exactly. And some people are worried about security, Open source models could be more vulnerable to attacks.
It's like giving everyone the instructions for building a bomb.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a little scary.
Right. And then there's the question of how much it really costs to develop, that $5.5 million figure. A lot of people think that's not the whole story.
Like maybe the Chinese government is subsidizing it.
That's what some people are saying. It could be a strategic move to challenge the U.S.'s dominance in AI.
Oh, man. So we're not just talking about companies competing anymore. This is like a whole geopolitical thing.
AI is a big deal, and it's only going to get bigger.
Okay, well, this is already fascinating, and we've barely scratched the surface.
We've got a lot more to unpack.
Well, and let's get to it. You ready for part 2?
Bring it on. It's kind of crazy how fast things are moving right now.
Yeah, we've talked about all the things that could go wrong, but what about the good stuff? Could this actually be a good thing for AI in general?
I think it could be. This is like a real challenge to the big guys like OpenAI and Google. You know, the ones that have been calling the shots for so long?
David and Goliath.
Exactly. And DeepSeek isn't just some little guy. They're claiming they can do it better and cheaper, and that's got people worried.
I bet it has.
Oh, yeah. Like, I saw this post where people were saying that mid-level managers at those companies are freaking out. Their projects are suddenly looking pretty expensive and maybe not even necessary.
So it's like DeepSeek just flipped the table on everyone.
They totally did. And the open source thing makes it even crazier. Imagine if this starts a trend. Everyone starts making their AI open source and competing on price.
That would be amazing for people who actually use AI, right?
It would be huge. It could make AI way more accessible.
But you think big companies are just going to give up?
No way! They have tons of money and smart people working for them. They're going to fight back.
So it's like an arms race, but with AI instead of weapons?
Kinda.
Yeah.
And the U.S. government's not going to sit back and watch either. This is about more than just companies competing. It's about who controls the future of AI.
This is getting really intense.
Oh, yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for regular people? How's DeepSeek going to change our lives?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like things are changing really fast.
Yeah, they are. We're moving away from this world where only a few companies had all the power.
So AI is becoming more democratic.
Exactly. But we still don't know what that's going to look like. It's exciting and scary at the same time.
Yeah, it's like we're standing at the edge of this totally new world.
That's a good way to put it. So you remember how we talked about distilled models?
Yeah, you said it's like they take the big R1 model and make smaller versions of it.
Right. They're basically extracting the knowledge from R1 and putting it into other models like Llama and Quinn.
Okay, and why is that important?
Well, because those smaller models can run on devices that aren't as powerful, like your phone.
So you could have an AI as smart as R1 on your phone.
Potentially,
Okay.
yeah. And that could change everything. Think about AI and healthcare education, all sorts of stuff.
It's like everyone could have their own personal AI assistant.
Exactly. But we also have to be careful, right? All those risks we talked about are still there.
Yeah, we can't just get carried away with all the cool possibilities.
Yeah. Right. We need to think about the ethical side of things. Make sure this technology is used for good.
So how do we do that?
That's the big question. We need to have these conversations, talk about the potential problems, and
Yeah.
make sure there are rules in place.
Okay, so distilled models are one piece of this puzzle, but there's also this reasoning model thing. Can we talk about that?
Sure. You remember how we talked about how R1 learns by trial and error? Well, a reasoning model is kind of like the next step.
Okay.
It doesn't just give you an answer. It shows you how it got there. It breaks down the problem step by step, almost like a human would.
So it's more transparent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's important because it helps us understand how the AI is making decisions. We can see if it's being biased or making mistakes.
Like it's showing its work.
Yeah, it's like having a window into the AI's thought process. So even though there are all these risks and we don't know exactly what's going to happen, I think this is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we're on the verge of something big.
We are. Open source AI is changing everything, and DeepSeek is leading the way.
It's kind of inspiring, actually. Like this small company from China is taking on the biggest names in tech and pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
And they're making everyone rethink the way we approach AI. It's a really interesting time to be following this.
Totally. So what now? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the most important thing is to stay informed. Keep learning about these new developments and keep asking questions.
And keep sending in those sources.
Exactly. We need your help to make sense of all this. So, what do you say? Ready for the final part of our deep dive?
Let's do it. It really does feel like something out of a movie. AI is changing so fast now.
It is. I mean, just a few years ago, we wouldn't have even thought this was possible.
And DeepSeek's kind of leading the charge. Like they're not just improving things, they're completely changing the game.
It's a total paradigm shift. This open source thing could be as big as the internet was. It's opening up a whole new world for AI.
It's almost like a philosophical change too, right? Like before it was all about keeping secrets, and now DeepSeek's like, here's everything, let's all work together.
It's pretty amazing, and that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about the tech itself.
Yeah.
It's about what it means for all of us. Like, how is this going to change the world?
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about how DeepSeek's doing things differently and how it could make AI cheaper and more accessible.
And we talked about the risks, too, right? Like the bias and the security stuff.
Yeah, and ultimately it comes down to this question of what do we want the future of AI to look like?
That's the big one, isn't it? Do we want a future where only a few powerful companies control AI? Or do we want it to be something that everyone can use and benefit from?
I mean, it's kind of up to all of us to decide, right?
It is. We have to make choices about how we develop and use this technology, and those choices are going to have big consequences.
So DeepSeek's pushing things in a certain direction, but it's not like the ending's already written. We can still change things.
Absolutely. The future of AI is being written right now, and we all have a role to play.
I like that. Okay, so just to recap, we talked about DeepSeek's innovative approach and how they're claiming to make AI more efficient and affordable.
We talked about the benefits of open source AI, like transparency and collaboration, but also the potential risks like bias and misuse.
And we talked about how DeepSeek R1 is a reasoning model, which means it can actually show its work and explain how it's making decisions.
Right, which is really important for building trust and making sure AI is used ethically.
This has been a really incredible deep dive. We've learned so much about DeepSeek and the future of AI.
It's a complex topic, and we've only scratched the surface.
But hopefully we've given you some things to think about and some tools to help you navigate this crazy world of AI.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep pushing for a future where AI benefits everyone.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.